My background is blue collar, right? And, I didn't have an epiphany one day driving into the office that the world needs a new app, right? My progression has been steady and slow throughout. And, that's the story that I'm telling.
Welcome to 30 Years in 30 Minutes, the podcast that distills decades of wisdom and success into bite-sized, inspiring conversations. My name is Michael Oved, the host of the podcast. Along with Terrence Gable, I sit down with the world's most accomplished individuals and hear their stories of grit and determination. How did they rise to the top? What is the key to their success? How did they overcome the obstacles that they faced along the way? You will learn all that and more on 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Bob Cecere was the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Financial Officer of Barings Asset Management North America, and now a $347 billion global investment firm with over 1,800 professionals and offices in 16 countries. Most recently, he founded the Cecere Group, which is a financial services consultancy firm, and before Barings, Bob worked at PwC, John Hancock, and Putnam Investments. Bob, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Michael.
Of course. Now, being the CFO of a global investment firm is no small feat, and I'm sure it took a significant amount of training to allow you to accomplish that. What about your upbringing shaped your professional career, like your leadership style and your work ethic?
Sure. I'd say the most defining element of my upbringing, and I'm talking, going back to my family upbringing, was probably the development of a good, solid work ethic. And it's funny, just thinking it through, I think at the time, I probably didn't realize I was developing a work ethic. Just doing basically whatever my father told me to do. And so I think, following his lead and understanding from him that, a job not done right is a job not worth doing. I think all of that helped me, to develop a real intensity and a focus in the work that I took on.
How'd you develop that work ethic?
Well, I really was working with him, on small things around the house, right? Basically, helping him with carpentry projects or small construction projects. And he was demanding. He was a tough guy. And he held you to a standard. And that's what he wanted to see. And, if you met the standard, you were fine. If you didn't meet the standard, you had to work again until you got there. And
what about in college? First, did you go to college? And second, what was it like in college for you in terms of developing that work ethic?
Right. So a little funny story. At first, I was not planning to attend college. Right? And so my senior year, I graduated from high school, and I think it was probably June or July, and my father asked me, so what are you going to do? I said, well, I think maybe I'll go into the Army. And he said, well, have you thought about college? I said, no, not particularly. He said, well, why don't you just try it? I remember those words distinctly. Why don't you just try it? And at that time, all the admissions windows had closed, and there was only one school that I could attend. It's currently UMass Boston. So I applied, I got in, I attended, and then after about 3 semesters or so, I transferred to Babson College and really focused on business. And that's kind of where the whole business focus came about.
That mentality, why don't you just try it? Or that mentality, why not? That's something at least I carry with me, whatever I do. Why not? Just go for it. Just do it. How have you carried that throughout your career?
Well, I'll say not in a cavalier sense, right? We all take risks, right? But you've got to measure the risk. So you take measured risks. You understand the ramifications of not making it, right? And the rewards of making it. And you make an assessment. Is it worth it? And that's how I kind of balance the risk, both personally and professionally. And over time, your risk tolerance changes. So, when you're first starting out, you might have a much higher risk tolerance. But as you get older and progress in your career, your risk tolerance changes because maybe your values change or what's important to you changes.
And when did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in finance? Was that something that you went into college knowing you wanted to do, or
No.
is that something you developed in college?
Right. I would say that, when I was in college, and you have to declare a major. The major I declared was accounting. And, I had a good friend who I looked up to, and he was keenly focused on accounting, becoming a CPA. And so he had I'd say, a really positive influence on me. And, it's because of him that I went in that particular direction. If you think about it, I've been influenced by people all my life, right? Or at least I've taken advice. My father, just try it, right? My good friend, public accounting is the way forward. And even to go to Babson, another friend suggested if you want business and you want to go to a business school, Babson is the place to be. So listening to advice, taking direction, it's something that helps you. There are a lot of people who might reject it because of ego or their own level of vanity, but I was open to it.
And so once you listened to your friend's advice, you moved into PwC, you went to John Hancock, and you went to Putnam. You took leadership positions there, and then you went for Barings.
Mm-hmm.
And then you worked at Barings.
Yes.
How was your time at Barings like? How were you able to climb up the corporate ladder and end up becoming CFO of North America?
Well, Barings was, I think, the best work experience I had. And I was there for, well over 20 years. And so I think that speaks to it. So backing up, how are you able to move forward? If I go back to my prior positions, I always found myself in situations where I could broaden my skill set, right? And so I'll give it a light example. Not only could I work on accounting issues, but in the investment business, but I could also work on how investments worked, investment operations, which is another dimension. So that when I moved into these other positions, that kind of well-roundedness, that broader skill set really accrued to my advantage. And when I got to Barings, I initially started out in a traditional corporate finance role. But then I moved into another role that was more operational while retaining the finance duties. So, developing that adapting to that broad skill set, being able to deliver value to the firm in a couple of different areas, all of those accrued to my benefit and helped me progress through the firm.
I mean, you make it seem much easier than it truly is, because a lot of people go into a big firm and then find it very difficult to work the same job for an extended period of time, especially if it's not their own firm. How were you able to stick to it? How were you able to stick to the same job for so many years and then eventually reap the benefits of it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't the same job, right? From one firm to another, it wasn't the same job. But even when I got into Barings, I had many different jobs, right? I had kind of a strict corporate accounting. I had the COO role was an operational role that kind of morphed eventually into some client-facing work and some real specialist technical work, right? And that caused me to have to interact with the senior team that operated out of our London office. So it was different jobs. And I'll say the underlying factor there was adaptability, being able to adapt, change, and develop that skill set in those other areas.
And how can somebody who's looking to climb a corporate ladder at a large company like you did, how can they develop that?
Well, I think that you've got to distinguish yourself, right? In a particular way. So you distinguish yourself in the corporate world through your work, through your work product, through your output. And that's where you kind of combine your work ethic and your kind of personal attributes. So we talked a bit before about work ethic, right? We know what that is. But personal attributes are really important, and they're particularly important when you're earlier in your career, because those work attributes become those personal attributes become your personal traits, right? And I'm talking about things like honesty, sincerity, being having kind of a strong ethical core, right? Things that make you a good person in the eyes of your colleagues, as well as just in absolute terms, because people really don't like to deal with people who are not good people, right? I mean, you want to deal with people who are pleasant, people who are easy to work with, people you can trust, right? So I think all of those factors are really important to develop as personal traits. You combine that with maybe a broadened skill set, good work ethic, and I think that's a great way to distinguish yourself and get attention, positive attention put on you with the right people.
Now, Bob, a lot of the process of climbing up the corporate ladder and includes separating yourself from any emotion, because you must have the understanding that your work needs to go through 15 different people until it's a final product. How has your experience been with having emotion attached to the work that you do?
Quite honestly, there's no place for emotion. You cannot confuse fact with emotion. As a matter of fact, you have to separate the two. You have to deal in facts, because if you're dealing with your senior team, and this is the perspective that I take. And just even the background, we ran the show in the U.S., but we all reported to the management committee in London, right? And so key decisions had to be run by them, and you had to prep for the decisions. You had to make sure you had your facts straight. And more importantly than anything else, your facts had to be straight, and they had to be facts. I mean, you can't make an argument on emotion and expect it to carry. So, we were very, our team in the U.S., we were very particular on culling out emotion and just getting down to fact, numbers, statistics, results. What if we do this? What will happen? Well, this will happen. If someone says, gee, it's just not fair, forget it. That is dead on arrival. And it doesn't matter whether the person reviewing it sits in London or New York. It's not going to fly. So I think that's a message for kind of, folks starting out. Separate fact from emotion, stay with the facts, and, leave the emotion for another situation.
And I know this is something that Terrence has told me that you've said a lot, the importance about being the first person to come in and the first person to leave. Can you speak to that?
Well, that comes out of your work habits in how you develop yourself, right? I have a habit of coming in early, for sure. And, when the job demands it, you stay late to get the job done. And that's a commitment to the job. And those are traits that people see as evidence of your character and your commitment and your seriousness too. You want to be considered someone who's serious in what they do, but when the job needs to get done, you want to be one of the people who are out there leading the charge to get that job done. No matter what it is, right? Whether it's setting up accounts or doing analytics to determine investment performance and where you can get new business.
Yeah. And a lot of people also, the reason they don't stick with these companies is because they don't really want to be making money for a different firm where they could be making money for themselves, given all their experience. How did you reconcile the fact that you're not really working for yourself at this firm, you're working for a larger organization, but that's still something that you wanted to pursue?
Well, look, I really enjoyed the investment business, right? And I really enjoyed the things we did at Barings. I enjoyed the nature of the firm, which was a true global firm. I enjoyed the type of clients we had. And so I'm not going to be able to replicate that on my own. I know that. So I look at the situation at the firm and I say, how can I get the most out of this? And when you've been working at a place for an extended period of time, your value, you develop another level of value. And that other level is your kind of complete fluency in the functions that you're working on, as well as a real understanding of the firm, how it works, and how the industry works, right? And so with that knowledge, right, you're able to take on things outside of your scope, moderately outside of your scope, and do what you want with them. I'm talking about making improvements. And again, it sounds boring. Look, my background is blue collar, right? And, I didn't have an epiphany one day driving into the office that the world needs a new app, right? My progression has been steady and slow throughout. And, that's the story that I'm telling. So I think that being able to take on areas where you can make your mark, make a difference in a small way, but contribute to the overall value of the organization and improve a process, for example, I think that is a great way to kind of take yourself forward.
That makes sense. And you spoke a bit about personal attributes and certain skills that are necessary to have in order to truly climb up the corporate ladder like you did. What about habits? Are there any habits that you think people ought to practice or people ought to develop?
Yeah.
If they're seeking to do what you did?
Sure. I would say that when you take on an assignment, a project, even if it's your day job, you got to do it to your best ability, right? And you always have to take that approach. If you go half speed, it's obvious, and you're not doing yourself a service. So whatever you take on, you've got to really try to nail it. I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a story. At one point, I had to sit for some security exams, right, where you could securities license, and I think a passing grade was 70, right? And so I took the material. I studied very hard, and I wasn't historically a great student. I was okay. And my score on the test was 95, which I just kicked the doors down. Right? And I remember talking to someone about it, and he said, "How'd you do?" I said, "I did great, scored a 95. And his reaction was, that's 25 points of wasted effort. I'll never forget that. And that reaction sums up right there the difference between people who are just going to go out and, kick butt, right, to get the job done right, and other folks who will, just do enough of what they have to do to get by. And there's a difference in the long run on how those people, progress and turn out. So it's just a real life example of that. And again, that's a story. That's something I'll never forget.
Wow. Now, in addition to those habits, in addition to the habits that you have to develop, for a large part of your career, you were in a significant leadership position where you decided who to hire and who to let go. What advice would you give to someone who is hired to a large firm and who's looking to put themselves on track to make it to the C-suite? Now, you spoke about the personal attributes that you need to develop. You spoke about the habits that you need to develop. Beyond those, what attitude should one take?
So you've got to be at two levels. On the professional level, you've got to offer value. And quite honestly, on the personal level, you have to be considered a good colleague. Again, this isn't story time, but another example is one of the firms I worked at prior to Barings. We used to go through an exercise. And, living up here in New England, you get these heavy snowstorms sometimes, right? And it affects people's ability to get into the office and how to execute, because we didn't have work from home at that time. So we used to go through an exercise where we'd rank all the staff in terms of if there was a blizzard, a snowstorm, who's the first person you want to see walk through the door, okay? And that first person, it's not going to be the manager of the department or some senior level person. It's going to be a staff person who knows how to get the job done, someone who you respect, and someone who you trust. And so I think in that scenario, you want to be considered one of the first to walk through the door in the eyes of the management team, right? And when you walk through the door, they'll have a smile on their face. That is, I think, that's the litmus test for that.
So that's why people get hired. What about fired? What is the biggest reason people get fired?
Well, in my business, when the market cycle turns, assets of the firm drop, revenue drops, but expenses don't drop. You have to make the expenses drop in order to hit the bottom line. And the biggest expense you have is people. So you cut people, right? And that's what happens. That's what happens in Wall Street all the time. But deciding who to cut is the mystery, or the challenge, I'll say. And quite frankly, you don't cut the first person you want to walk through the door, right? You might cut someone towards the bottom of that group. And those are the people who haven't distinguished themselves, the people who maybe haven't developed the great work habits, people who, not sincere, maybe not honest. So those exercises do weed out people that, you don't want to have on the team long term.
And you mentioned before about the market cycles, that regardless of market cycles, there are expenses and people need to get fired. Now, speaking about the market cycles, as a CFO of now one of the largest asset management firms, you've endured many market cycles, including the Great Recession of 2008.
Right.
How did you weather those storms, and what lessons did you learn from the significant stress that I'm sure you faced during those experiences?
And so we've been through numerous market down cycles, So when the market is in a down cycle, it takes the elevator down. When it comes back up, it takes the stairs, right? So there's always a lag coming back up. Reflecting back on that, and it didn't take long for me to get to this point, is I always felt that, when times are good, you can't overspend and overcommit. What that means is don't overstaff, right? Don't hire people that you don't need to hire, because you know that when the market turns south, that you're going to have to cut people loose, right? So design your operation to stay focused on the functions that are really needed by the business. If don't go around making up functions just to hire people because you think you might have budget money for it. So that is the huge lesson that I learned, and it stayed with me on a going forward basis. Don't overhire. Staff the operation within the needs of the business.
Beyond the importance of not overhiring as a firm, I'm sure it must have been very stressful for you to be one of the leaders of an asset management firm of that size during these types of financial crises. How did you personally deal with that?
Well, I mean, that the market is going to turn positive eventually. It's just a matter of grinding through the down cycle to get to the up cycle. And again, you take actions. It's a lot of cost cutting. That's really what it is. Because when you think about it, if the market is down, the ability to sell more may not be there. Okay, the way to increase sales in a down market is probably just to take business away from competitors, as opposed to generate new business organically. And so, that was another area where we focused, which is, doing your analytics on performance, which other of your competitors are performing poorly that offer the same products, and which clients, which organizations out there that use that competitor might be willing to make a move to your product because it offers a better value proposition. So there was some analytics and some metrics involved to kind of boost the top line.
And taking a more generalist and broad approach, based on all of your experiences, all of your successes, and all of your failures, if you were speaking to somebody who's starting their career right now, what would you tell them to best prepare them to take your route of success and to climb the corporate ladder and truly end up at the C-suite of one of the largest investment management firms?
Well, I would give them this advice, which I may not have followed as rigorously early in my career, but I would tell them that it's really important, it's critically important to define yourself, right? Define yourself first as a person, honesty, integrity, modesty. I think that's really critical because who you are as a person, right, precedes you. Okay, that precedes you. And then your work experience accompanies you. Your work product, I should say, accompanies you. So I think be the best person you can. And I think that touches also in a big way on ethics, right? And let's just call it knowing the difference between right and wrong. And there's a lot of what times that decisions like that have to be made. And, you need to be strong enough to resist and smart enough to recognize when those situations come about.
How can one define themselves, or how can they take themselves on the journey to define themselves?
It's really through your actions. And I think, like I said, being that person is really important because people will see that. And the other way you're going to define yourself is through your execution, right? Your execution on your work assignments that you get. If I give you a project and I say, Michael, please do this, that, and the other thing, right? And I get something back and it's kind of okay. Well, that's defining you, right? Or if I get something back that's really bang on, that defines you too. And if you're an honest guy, if you're modest, then, in my book, you've shot up. And when it comes time for promotions, we say, we need a controller level person. Who do we have available? Well, we got these 4 people. Well, I know Michael's a solid choice. He's got the work ethic, he's got the quality output, and he's a good person. You get it.
Got it.
That's how we did it.
Yeah. If you can boil your entire career down to one lesson, and it can be this lesson, but if you can boil your entire career down to one lesson, what would it be? Well,
yeah, no question it would be adaptability, because each of the firms that I've worked with I've had different roles there. And, you have to be successful in the organization and to survive in the organization, you have to be able to serve more than one role, right? And because that's what the organization needs from you. And so, I don't know how much farther I can go with that, but being adaptable to the needs of the organization, really critical. And the organization, if they're worth it, they'll appreciate that, right? They'll appreciate the sacrifices and the flexibility that your staff people make. So I'll just leave it at that.
Makes sense.
The focus of another podcast.
And the last part of the podcast is rapid fire questions.
Yes.
So I'll start with the first one. What book do you recommend?
Oh, there's a book by David Fromkin called A Peace to End All Peace. It's about the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the creation of modern day Middle East. It's real and it's very timely.
And what is your biggest regret?
Well, my biggest regret is probably that I did not go to law school. I think.
Why?
Why? Oh, well, at that time, I couldn't accommodate it with my family life, right, at that time. And, I thought it fit. It would have fit nicely. And I still think it would have fit nicely. But, I had other priorities that I had to attend to, and there were family priorities.
If you have a career in investing, do you still think it's important to go to law school?
Well, I think you're not necessarily going to be a lawyer, right? I think when you look at when you look at the law is a foundation, right? And you can understand the parameters that you're going to operate in. For example, when you have those SEC exams, they're lawyers. They're coming in talking about securities law and how have you complied. Within an investment firm, there are stock pickers, there are stock analysts, the investment team. But outside of that, there are accountants and lawyers and operations people and salespeople who do their thing. So I think law is a great element to have in your repertoire.
What is the best career move that you've made, and what is the biggest mistake that you've made?
Let's see, the best career move that I made. I think the best career move I made was when at Barings, my boss needed someone to step into a particular role, right? And I had a full-time job, but I agreed to step into it and keep my full-time job. And it is very appreciative of that. And that got me a lot of recognition. And because it was an area that I had familiarity with, I was able to do a decent job in it. And so I think that I got a lot of mileage out of that. And that's one of those defining elements that we talk about. How you define yourself as someone who, is adaptable, can jump in, can execute, and do a good job. So I would say that's the best career move. So what was the other one? My biggest mistake?
The biggest mistake that you've made career-wise?
Yeah, okay. Sure. Well, early on in my career, I was in a situation where I did not defend myself. It was, something to do with operations and how things were working and how it could work better otherwise. And at that point, I just felt that the person who was making these claims was just so off the wall that anyone who listened to it would clearly, come to the conclusion they're off the wall and things were fine as they were. Well, that wasn't the conclusion that people came to, right? They gave credence to these, these views. And what I should have done is I should have really challenged those views. And that's a lesson that I learned. And that's a lesson that on a going forward basis, I never let slide. If someone had something to say that that was critical, that wasn't justified, I was very actively in their face, trying to understand what they were talking about. And I think, you are your best advocate. So.
That makes sense. And that's actually exactly what they write in Proverbs. They say good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. And so, to your example, your name is more important than anything else. And
absolutely. Just extending that, as you progress in your career, your reputation becomes more and more important. The money's not as important, right? Because it should, you should be satisfied. But your reputation, that intangible, is really what you want to preserve. What you want.
And what is a quote that you live by, Bob?
Well, I've got a couple of them, if I can, right? And at different stages in your career. So early on, there was, when you try to figure out the right thing to do, right? It's, wisdom is knowing what to do next, but virtue is doing it. Okay. Right? That's something that, kind of guides you. Then with respect to the, kind of like the work product, right? The output. I think this came out of the Wall Street Journal. Implementation, the difference between a brilliant strategy and just another good idea. So with that, you've really got to be there. You've got to deliver, you've got to see it through. And then finally, this is my own, and I use this all the time, with my friends and family, is that people tell you what they want you to hear. So, when you hear something, don't be so gullible as to just buy the whole story. I don't want you to be cynical. You can be skeptical to some degree, but, think about that.
And that's beautiful, by the way. And the last question is, what has been the key to your success?
Well, I think the key to my success has been consistency. And so, it takes you a while to develop who you are, right? If you come out of school, you have to get, work on those personal traits, make sure that you understand the subject matter and you can execute on it and you can do a good job. Those are your work habits. But once you kind of figure that out and you get it together, you've got to deliver that on a regular basis. People expect that. And so, that's how you're defined. So I think it's that consistency that will be the key it has been the key to my success, and I would guess that it would be the key to others' success.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, for speaking with us. Wonderful to have you on the podcast. And this has been very educational for me, and I'm sure it will be for everyone listening and watching.
Well, thank you, Michael, and it was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.